You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 1/11/22. Well, a lot of what we discuss on the show has to do with living your best life in the face of huge adversity, both economic, political, and self-imposed, which is really what it all comes down to. So, person you're about to hear from, I think, can do a lot to help you get on the right path to living your best life, regardless of what is happening around you, and maybe because of what's happening around you. His name is JP Pawliw-Fry, and president, co-founder of the Institute for Health and Human Potential. And JP, you're basically fulfilling a vision you had 25 years ago. Why don't you tell us about that vision that led you to where you are now?
Yeah, great, Kerry. Good to be on with you today. Boy, I can't believe it's been that many years, but the vision was, simply finish my first degree, my undergrad, found myself in Asia in a monastery, in a Buddhist monastery. My mom and dad, and I grew up Catholic, so they were like, "What are you doing there?" But I learned this internal technology of how to manage under pressure, how to manage those difficult situations, how to manage emotions, how to manage thinking, how to understand thinking. I knew nothing about that, and I grew up, still have ADHD, and so for me, this was like manna from heaven. And I thought, hey, I'm going to bring this back somehow, and continued on with other training. But essentially, the work that excited me was in psychoneuroimmunology, which is like how we think affects our nervous system, affects other things, including our immune system. And so that's when it started. And then I was lucky enough to get introduced to some athletes, working with Olympic athletes and now NBA, NFL, NHL teams. And then into U.S. Army, Navy, and kind of corporate groups. But the bottom line is that everyone who's listening today, and this may sound almost morbid to say or pessimistic, but it's just true. We are all suffering. We are challenged in our relationships. We're challenged with COVID. We're challenged with dealing with the ups and downs. And because we're not given training in how to manage, to see the uncertainty and the fluidity of life, the ups and downs, we find ourselves suffering more than we need to suffer. And so our work is actually to bring this in a very, kind of U.S. Army, Navy kind of group. I mean, this is not soft stuff or corporate kind of folks and audiences, to give them tools to be better in those more difficult moments, to be able to perform under pressure. And that's how it started, and that's what we're doing now.
All right. So let's take examples here, real life examples of, you made me think of a quote from Abraham Lincoln, and I think is as true now as it ever was. And that was that people are generally as happy as they allow themselves to be. And that's kind of a profound statement. It kind of goes back to the founding of the United States: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And really what it shows is, at least in Lincoln's view, that how happy, how content, how good your life is basically up to you.
Yes and no. So, when you look at the research, so happiness we could talk about, but I think you're talking about bigger things here as well as happiness, like kind of what drives our life, our happiness, our success. And we know that about 50% of it comes from inside the individual, and 50% of it comes from the situation we're in. So you can roughly say, like, our behavior, well, actually, I'm going to say two things on this. Our behavior is driven. Let's stick with behavior for a minute. Our behavior is driven by 50% what comes from our characteristics, our intention, our hard work, and 50% is the situation in which we find ourselves. That drives our behavior. And that's important because we are influenced by people in ways we're not even aware of, which says to everyone listening, pay attention to who you hang out with and their characteristics. And is that the kind of people you want to be influenced by? So that's around behavior. Now, this is going to get slightly confusing, but maybe it'll make sense. That's our behavior. Now, on things like happiness, it's interesting because you can sit there and look at, again, what's the best research tell us? Only 10% of our situation drives our happiness. And the far greater part, and it's around 50%, is more our intention and all the things we're doing. So to come back to Lincoln's quote, you're not wrong. But there's some other variables in there, I would just say, when you look at the science.
Okay. But what's happening externally and how you perceive it are often two different things. And your perception of the externalities as you can perceive them is either positive or negative. So again, I would aver that Lincoln is more true today than he ever was before, or as Eisenhower once said, things are more like they are today than they've ever been before. Look, it's you make the decision, something negative happens in your life. I watch these YouTubes, and this guy goes through this really traumatic thing, family situation. We don't really need to get into the details. And he is like in shock, blown away. And he goes to a bar. He drives and drives, stops in at this like country bar, and there's this guy, Ray, at the bar. And he tells, he's talking to Ray, and he has a couple of drinks, starts to loosen up, and he shares with Ray his situation that happened with his family. And Ray said to him, like 3 years ago, I went through exactly the same thing as you. And you're at a point here. You have a choice to make. You either take this and become a better person, improve yourself, improve your life, or go drink yourself into oblivion. And it hits this guy, and he realizes the decision is his. He didn't have any choice about the situation that he just encountered because that was outside his control. It already happened. But how he's going to react to it and what he is going to do with his life really, and what you do with your life is entirely up to you. So from that standpoint, I think it's more 80-20, JP. Yeah, you have negative things. You get in a car accident, you become paralyzed. Not much you can do about that. But you get into a car accident, your car is totaled, then you walk away. Is that such a bad thing? Maybe yes, and maybe no. But you get to fight another day.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff there. It's interesting. There's a question in the research around optimism. Let me ask you this, Kerry, and all the listeners can be answering in their own minds. If you went into a bank and there was a robber, an armed robbery was taking place, and you got shot in your shoulder, non-fatal, but you got shot, but you didn't die, would you consider yourself lucky or not?
Well, unlucky in that I got hit by the bullet. I didn't dodge the bullet, as it were, but very lucky that I'm alive to tell the story.
But if you had to choose,
Oh, fortunate, because you're still alive to basically, fight another day. So I view that as optimism. But there was a great one that I can't remember now, but I could see where you would think it was negative because you got hit by the bullet. This friend of mine broke up with his girlfriend. She was mentally ill, and he was with her 4 or 5 years, and she stopped taking her meds. He's depressed. I said, hey, Bob, you dodged a bullet here, because you could have married this person and you'd be stuck with her, because it's impossible in certain states to divorce a mentally ill spouse, right?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm not a lawyer, but I'll say this. I think the bottom line, though.
I am. So
okay, well, there you go. There you go. So I'm going to learn something here for sure. But I'll just say this. I think it comes down to your point is there are things that are happening outside of us all the time, and we have control over how we perceive it, how we make sense of it, how we make meaning out of it, and then what we do with that. And so I think you're absolutely correct on that. And I mean, the biggest thing is, are we building skills to do that? That for us is the most important question, because it's like, the athletes I work with or the Marines we work with, there are a bunch of skills. As a podcaster, there's a bunch of skills you need to learn, and you get better. It becomes a craft if you work at it. And it's not unlike these internal skills of self-management that we can learn, but we have to put in the time. We can't just, it's not good enough just to think positive thoughts. We actually have to put the work in, so that when we're under pressure, these become our default behaviors, as opposed to we just go to what we know, which might or might not serve us.
That's such a great point. So let's talk about toxic people in your life, because that is an issue that probably most of you out there deal with, that you don't exactly know the right way to deal with it. Because some of these people you're relying upon, they're relying upon you, and you don't know what to do. Now, I have personally cut toxic people out of my life totally. Just go no contact, block them on everything, and just don't talk to them. Now, I'm not sure that that's always the best course of action, but a toxic person really can kind of ruin your day there, JP. You know what I mean? It can really make your life a living hell. So the idea of cutting them out, really important, but the skill set involved in cutting them out, you have to develop that, don't you?
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Arcana Corporation is on the verge of bringing the world's highest grade silver mine into production. The Revenue Virginius mine in Colorado has proven improbable silver reserves grading nearly 37 ounces per ton silver, with an all-in sustaining production cost of only US $8 per ounce of silver. The mine is fully permitted with infrastructure already in place, and the company has announced they plan to commence production in 2020. Achieving successful production usually results in a significant upward share price re-rating on the Lassonde curve. Arcana trades under the ticker AUN in Toronto and AUNFF in New York. To learn more, go to arcana.com. That's AURCANA.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I mean, kind of let's define toxic, right? Like, that would be an important question for all the listeners to think about. But I think the bottom line is, for all of us, if we deem that this person is unhealthy to us in some way, shape, or form, there's probably graduated steps of, you give them feedback, and are they open to listening and changing? You try to get them support. Are they open to changing? At some point, I think, we have to decide, is this not serving us? And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to do, is to end a relationship as you're describing. But absolutely, it's one of the most important things we can learn, because if we don't have boundaries, then, we really are going to struggle, because we are influenced by our situation. Emotions are infectious, and we can be in those situations. And I think, you sound like I certainly have been in situations with a toxic person where I almost didn't even realize it until after the fact, when I was away from them for a certain amount of time, how impactful it was on me.
And I would define toxic as somebody who you're in a relationship with, who doesn't have your best interest at heart, and are either exploiting you or abusing you for reasons that are not necessarily related to anything you've said or done or acted in this relationship. So I'd call that toxic. And then there's obviously degrees of toxicity. One thing, JP, in the era we're living in now, in these really crazy, trying times, a lot of you out there, millions, have just opted out of the workforce. I'm not sure that is the best way of dealing with it. Although some days I wake up and I say, maybe retirement is right for me. Maybe I'm getting closer to it. That's a skill there. You have to know when to hold and when to fold. But putting the economic questions aside, opting out of the workforce maybe isn't the healthiest thing for many of you out there.
I mean, is that a question, or do you want me to comment on that?
Yeah, well, the idea of terminating your career because you can, the government's going to pay you not to work or whatever. I guess it's kind of a crossroads for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I think it's a fallacy that the government's going to pay for people. number one. Number two, I think what's clear is that for many years, there has been more power in the hands of employers. I'm an employer. We hire people, for many years, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But there's less power now in the hands of employers. There's more power in the hands of employees. And it's going to be that way for a long time, just because of the demographic shift that's coming on. This is a non-COVID related thing, but COVID is creating a more acute situation. And so, to be honest, I think the ball now is in the employer's court to start paying living wages, to start thinking about what is it that helps an individual, attracts them, engages them, helps them flourish. Because if you're not going to do that, you're not going to get good workers who are going to stay around. And so, to be honest, I think it's been a long time coming because, quite frankly, employers have had more power, have been able to have their way, and that's changing now. And so, I think this is going to make employers much better, the workplace much healthier than it has been over the last many years.
So what about the effect of the workplace on people's outlook towards life? So many of you out there feel trapped. And now another trend we're seeing here, JP, is that people are upping and leaving their jobs, quitting their jobs at record numbers. So in line with your last statement, that's probably not altogether a negative trend, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's negative or positive. I feel like we're in the middle of something that's happening. It's hard to maybe deduce exactly what's going on and draw conclusions. So I'll guess right now. I don't know how well I know this, but or how any of us know this. But I'll say this. I think people are realizing, what do I need? Like I'm still going through a pandemic, and what do I kind of need? And I think there's in some ways we talk about the great migration or the great resignation or the big quit. But I think there's a great migration happening as well, where people are realizing, hey, I could live in Palm Beach, Florida, or I could live in Orlando and work at a company in New York. And that was never the case before. And so I think there's a lot of changes happening. And the real question is, are leaders in organizations open to this new flexible, fluid way of working? Because again, those who are going to be able to meet needs of an employee, and not just financial, but all the different needs, are going to be the organizations that win. And so anyone listening, you want to look for those organizations who really operate differently, who really put the employee at the center, because those are the ones who are winning. And it's a really interesting time, though, Kerry. It definitely is.
All right. So 3 things you can do in 2022 that will actually take back power in your life and help you deal with the traumas you're facing.
Yeah, great question. So I'd say number 1 is understand what you do under pressure. Now, there's research we've done over the last 7 years, study of 34,000 people, and we found that there are some moments that have a bigger influence on our life, happiness, and our success. And those are what we call last 8% moments. So something like this, Kerry, you and I are having a conversation. Let's say you're my employer and you're my boss, let's say, and I want to have a conversation with you. And I get to 85, 90, 92% of what I want to say to you about this situation, maybe feedback to you, whatever, my job, whatever. But when I get to 92%, but when I get to that last 8%, that more difficult part of the conversation, the real truth that I want to speak, many of us, as opposed to, moving into having the conversation, we back off, we avoid it. Now, here's the thing. There are a lot of consequences when we do that. First of all, we feel bad inside. We feel like we were weak, and that affects our internal reputation, our confidence, and that's not a good thing. Number 2, I don't give you the chance to actually respond. Like maybe my request is totally legitimate. You just don't know it because you're busy, and I don't give you a chance to respond. And so we never get better in that situation. So I would say the first thing is for people to understand, what is the last 8% moment? And am I approaching or am I avoiding? Am I moving into or am I moving away from? And the last 8% come in conversations, they come in decisions, they come in different tasks. So it's like the thing that scares us. We want to, number 1, know what it is. And then number 2, build skills. And the skills are skills around managing emotions and having courage to be able to, as we say, stay and not run when things get hot. having been to 6 Olympic Games and worked with, these NFL and NBA teams, I can tell you that this is like critical learning that these athletes, U.S. Navy, and Army, they need to learn. So of course we need to learn it too, because can we stay in there when things get hot? So that's number 2. And look, that's literally what we do in our podcast, The Last 8% Morning. We've got 130 episodes, which is all around building the skills to stay and not run. And then number 3, I think you've made a really great point about, at the end of the day, we've got to sit there and think, what really matters to us? How do we want to live our life? And so there's skills around what is the last 8%, skills around staying, not running. But then number 3, a big driver, and we've talked about this already, is our relationships. Can we grow skills to emotionally connect to the important people in our life? Because and I know, when I'm feeling more connected to my partner, to my kids, I'm happier. And we know that from the research. And so, can we build skills of empathy? Can we build skills of compassion? Because many of us, here's what happens that I see. We get up, and I get it, we get triggered, and then we're like, going to shut down, and I don't want anything to do with them. But now we're isolated. And yet, if we can have the tough conversation, it means we can, build that relationship. And now we're going to be happier because of that. We are not an island. And so we've got to recognize that our happiness will come from those connections to other people, to our loved ones. And so that's probably what I would say, and start with understanding, and so by the way, one of the things that we do in this last 8%, our podcast is really, it's a walking podcast. It's 15 to 20 minutes every morning. You wake up, and as opposed to looking at your phone, which just spikes our cortisol, not the best thing we can do.
And maybe our dopamine levels too.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Instead, what you want to do is go for a walk, a 15 to 20 minute walk, put my podcast in your ear, and I walk you through this process of walking mindfulness. It's easier than sitting mindfulness, but you get the same benefits. There's an idea of the day, all around the stuff you and I talked about. How can you stay and not run? Build these skills of managing emotions around being better in the last 8%. And then we end off with what things are you grateful for and what are your goals for the day? And it's a great way to start the day and build these skills. So, there's probably more, but that's what I would say, Kerry, are the kind of steps that I would suggest for people.
All right, I like it, and it sounds good. I'll just conclude with something Dr. Robert Lustig said, and he's more a health...
I like his work.
Yeah,
fantastic.
You know him, and he says that pleasure is dopamine, and happiness is serotonin. So don't look for the quick fix. Look for the lasting fix, the thing that is going to work for you over time, because in the long run, you're going to be happier. And I'll bring it back to what late, great Abraham Lincoln said, is people generally are as happy as they allow themselves to be, coming from a guy who was pretty dour and you never really saw him in any of the pictures or portraits actually smile.
It's true, isn't it?
Yeah, and that reminds me, I had a client who was a happiness coach and one of the most depressed people I ever met, but that's for another day, JP. We'll have you on again. Really appreciate it. People want to find out more about you, connect, listen to your podcast. What's your website?
Yeah, last8%.com. So last8%.com. And then the podcast is Last 8% Morning. And you can find that, in all the different places you get your
wherever great podcasts are not sold, you can find there, iTunes, etc. Hey, really appreciate you coming on. Questions for JP? Just shoot us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com. Let this day be your happiest day, because when you can do that, then the next day is going to be even happier. JP, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you, Kerry. My pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.